years away from knowing when the general public will have more access to this particular work. Brothers and sisters, in I think it was January the 20th, 1999, a strange thing happened in the United States Postal Service. And January the 20th, 1999, a postage stamp was released. I mean, a real good image of Malcolm X was released as a postage stamp that you could put on your letters in first class. It wasn't third class. It wasn't book rate. It was a first class stamp that was released through the United States Postal Service in 1999. There are so many things, and as I said, I want to get to discussion quickly. But the man that many people, when he was alive, and I will take just a moment to talk about even those people who were closest to him, even the members of the Muslim Mosque Incorporated, even the members of the Organization of Afro-American Unity. I'm not being disparaging in intent about any of these people. But what I will say is that when Malcolm was being victimized, he was being followed around, he was being followed across the country. When the week before he was martyred, his house was firebombed at 2:30 in the morning, and his 4 daughters at that time and his wife and himself could have been killed inside of the house. That because of the things that were happening to Malcolm, that people began to separate themselves and put a little distance from Malcolm. That at the time that Malcolm was martyred, that the Muslims, those people who he had said that I had spent so many years of my life leading people in the nation of Islam, but now I believe that these teachings are false. So now I'm going to dedicate whatever time I have on earth to teach people about what for me has been a life-saving religion of Al-Islam. That those Muslims around him, and I'm not saying this in putting down anybody, but the Muslims around him when Malcolm was martyred, the Muslims for the most part were afraid. The sheikhs, the scholars, the imams were afraid to even funeralize, to give what we as Muslims have, a basic right of janazah, of a funeral prayer. They were afraid. So a young man, 32 years old at that time, by the name of Hisham Jabba, out of Elizabeth, New Jersey, had to step forward and say, if everybody else is afraid, I'm not afraid. I love what this man did, so I will step forward and do it. The point that I make, that there are many of us who, if Malcolm were to walk through that door today, and we know that that's not going to happen, but there are many people that if he were to walk through the door, that those people today that are talking about how I love Malcolm, that when Spike Lee's movie came out in 1992, it was safe to love Malcolm. It was safe to the tune that over $100 million in merchandise with X's on it was sold after this movie was made on Malcolm X. So it was fashionable, it was easy to say, I love Malcolm. I love what he said, I love what he did. But when he was alive, particularly after he left the Nation of Islam in the last 11 months of his life, the majority of us were afraid to be in the same room with Brother Malcolm. Let me digress just one other point. I never had the fortune to be, to my knowledge, in the same area of Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz, Malcolm X, but I have had the fortune and did have the fortune of knowing Betty Shabazz. and being on different programs with two of his daughters. And before Betty was tragically killed in 1997, myself and another brother by the name of Amir al-Islam was sitting in a restaurant outside of Medgar Evers College in Brooklyn, New York, where she was an administrator. And we were sitting there having lunch, and she was telling me, because Amir worked at the college, he knew the story, but she was telling me that when my husband was martyred, even before he was killed, that everybody talked, I love Sister Betty, I love your husband, he's such a brave man, I'll do anything for him. But when my husband was killed, those same people, particularly the Muslims, somehow just bowed their head and tried to make an exit, and were even so afraid that assistance that they could have given to try to help this family that has sacrificed so much, that they, for whatever reason, and only God knows for what reasons, they, like roaches, and I don't mean to sound harsh, because I wasn't there. Maybe I would have done the same thing. But according to Betty Shabazz, according to the daughters of Malcolm, this was the reality that confronted the family when Malcolm was martyred. Let me sort of shift gears just for a moment, because I promised that we want to have a good interactive discussion and not just sit here and let me just talk at you. We want to have this interactive discussion. But when we look at the life of Al-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, when we just take the time to revisit his life and see, well, what is it about somebody born in 1925, born in another century? What is it about somebody who's been dead almost one whole century, half of a century himself? What's the reason? Why are we sitting here in 2008 even having this particular discussion? So I want to talk about a few points before I stop and open it up for discussion.